My husband punched my pregnant sister in the stomach, and thank God he did. The celebration was taking place in the fireside lounge of our estate, a room filled with the cloying scent of lilies and the artificial sweetness of a tiered buttercream cake. My sister, Elena Vance, sat like a queen on a velvet armchair, her 8-month belly a proud, rounded swell beneath her designer maternity dress. She was the center of our universe. Then, the world fractured. David, my husband, a software engineer who lived a life of quiet logic, walked up to her and without a word of warning punched her full force in the stomach. The sound was sickening, not the wet thud of fist against flesh, but a muffled, strange crump. Alina folded in half like a piece of hinged cardboard. She crashed backward into the gift table, sending silver rattles and pastel-wrapped boxes flying across the hardwood floor. 50 guests erupted into a cacophony of screams. I shoved David backward, my heart hammering against my ribs, screaming, "What is wrong with you? Have you lost your mind?" In the corner, my mother, Margaret, was already fumbling with her phone, her voice a shrill mess as she dialed 911. My father, Robert, the formidable family patriarch, didn't hesitate. He and my brothers lunged forward, pinning David against the wall. I was hitting David's chest, calling him a psychopath, while Elena lay on the floor holding her belly, wailing that something was wrong. Her boyfriend, Julian, was hovering over her, frantically checking for blood. Everyone had their phones out, filming the carnage, while my grandmother clutched her chest, her face turning a terrifying shade of gray. My aunts grabbed their children and fled, their heels clicking frantically toward the foyer. I dropped to the floor beside my sister, trying to feel the baby kick, but she kept pushing my hands away with desperate strength. "Don't touch it! It hurts too much!" she shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that set my teeth on edge. A neighbor tried to intervene, but Elena curled into a tight ball, screaming for no one to touch her. My uncle was already on the phone with the family lawyer, shouting about pressing charges for the attempted murder of an unborn child. Elena kept her arms wrapped around her midsection so tightly that nobody could get close, crying that she could feel the baby slipping away. "Look at her stomach where I hit her!" David roared, his voice cracking as he fought against the men holding him. I wanted to kill him, but then I saw it. There was a deep concave dent in my sister's belly that wasn't popping back out. It stayed there, a grotesque crater in her abdomen. That wasn't flesh and bone, that was memory foam. "That's foam under there, not a baby," David yelled, "and I can prove everything she's been doing." I reached my sister before she could crawl away. My hands went numb as I pressed against the edges of the dent. I didn't feel the warmth of a nephew. I felt the rough edges of padding and the scratchy grip of Velcro straps. My stomach did a slow, sick turn. Elena had been buying different-sized fake bellies online, from a theatrical costume shop to fake the progression of her pregnancy. She had been stealing ultrasound photos from forums and using her graphic design skills to Photoshop her name onto them. She had scammed our family out of $30,000 for medical bills and private appointments that never existed. David had checked with every OB in the city, and not one of them had a record of Elena Vance. I kept pressing on the dented foam while Elena tried to claw at me. The rest of the family started grabbing at her, finding more straps and layers of padding hidden beneath the silk. David shouted over the noise, explaining that he had followed her after she claimed to have a checkup yesterday. Instead of a doctor's office, she had gone to a bar for 2 hours before visiting the shop to buy more realistic bellies for the final weeks. Elena was screaming at him to shut up, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. David broke free, sweat pouring down his face as he pulled out his phone. He had accessed her laptop when she'd left it at our house. Her search history was a nightmare. Things like how to fake morning sickness, realistic pregnancy bellies, and what to say at a baby shower. But the real horror was much worse. "I saw her at the hospital last week following a teenage patient around the maternity ward," David said, his voice trembling. "Security footage from the County Justice Center and the hospital shows she's been stalking a girl from a teen pregnancy support group for 2 months. My mother was sobbing as David showed us screenshots of the footage. My sister had been trailing a vulnerable 17-year-old named Maya Sterling. Maya had no family and lived in foster care. Elena had befriended her, sitting next to her in the cafeteria and walking her to her car. She had found out that she was being induced at the Oakwood Birthing Center tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. In preparation for the birth, Elena had bought a car seat, professional nurse scrubs, and had even been studying the hospital's shift schedules to find the exact window when the nurses changed over. She had told us all she was delivering at a boutique birthing center that didn't even exist. Her plan was to disappear tonight and return tomorrow with a stolen newborn she would claim as her own. She had even been practicing forging birth certificates and purchased a breast pump and formula to make the ruse look real. The foam belly shifted completely sideways as my mother, driven by a sudden clarity, ripped Elena's dress upward. The entire prosthetic contraption was exposed. The room fell into a horrifying silence. Julian, her boyfriend, backed away from her as if she were a ghost, his face pale with the weight of the betrayal. Elena looked around the room, her eyes darting like those of a trapped animal. My cousin was already on the phone with the police, describing the fraud and the planned kidnapping of Maya Sterling's baby, while my aunts began loudly calculating the thousands of dollars they had given her for fake expenses. "You ruined everything!" Elena suddenly snarled at David. She ripped off the fake belly and threw it at his feet with violent force. "That teenager is a foster kid who doesn't deserve a child, and I would have given that baby a perfect life." She lunged for the door, but my father and brothers blocked her path. I watched my sister's face shift into something unrecognizable, something I had never seen in 30 years. It was like watching a porcelain mask finally shatter. None of us were prepared for the depth of her sociopathy or how far she was willing to go to curate her perfect life. She broke free from my father's grip and lunged at David with her nails out like claws, but my brothers caught her mid-air and slammed her down onto the living room carpet. She thrashed and kicked, screaming that we ruined her masterpiece, while the fake belly lay twisted and dented on the floor. The police sirens were already wailing, getting closer by the second. 2 police cars pulled into the driveway and officers rushed through the front door just as Elena tried to crawl toward the back exit. The officers looked at the fake belly, then at David's digital evidence, and finally at my sister, who was still fighting my brother's hold. They pulled out handcuffs while Elena switched between sobbing about our betrayal and screaming that Maya Sterling didn't deserve her own child anyway. As they dragged her to the cruiser, the neighbors lined the street to watch the fall of the Vance family. The lead detective said they needed to contact the Oakwood Birthing Center immediately. David gave them Maya Sterling's name, and they moved with a renewed frantic urgency. Our family was in ruins, but a child was safe. The detective didn't hesitate. He called for immediate protection for Maya Sterling. Within the hour, Oakwood Birthing Center had transitioned the 17-year-old high school senior to a secure, restricted-access floor, complete with guards stationed outside her room like sentinels. By midnight, an emergency protection order, signed with a judge's frantic, ink-heavy scrawl, was in place to keep my sister, Elena Vance, as far away from that girl as humanly possible. The lead investigator informed us that according to security footage, Elena had been stalking Maya for over 2 months, a silent predator lurking in the hospital corridors' flickering shadows. But then the atmosphere shifted from rescue to cold clinical procedure. An officer stepped toward David, my steady software engineer husband, and announced he was under arrest for assault. The room erupted in a chaotic chorus of disbelief. We screamed that he was a hero, that he was preventing a kidnapping, but the law didn't care about moral context in that heat of the moment. Assault is assault, the officer droned, cinching the plastic ties around David's wrists until they bit into the skin. I watched, my heart fracturing, as he placed his hands behind his back without a word of protest. While he was led away to the precinct detention area, I was already scrambling, hands shaking as I searched for our checkbook to cover whatever bail might be set. David spent a grueling night in a cold holding cell that smelled of floor wax and despair, while I sat in our suburban estate, calling every legal contact in our phone book. Most hung up once they heard the bizarre, tabloid-ready details. Finally, I reached Marcus Reed, a high-priced defense attorney with an agnostic skepticism and a shark's reputation. He agreed to meet us in the morning. I didn't sleep a wink. I was at the courthouse by 6 a.m. with $5,000 in cash tucked into my purse like a dirty secret. Marcus reviewed the evidence and confirmed that David had almost certainly saved that baby from being stolen, but the law remained a rigid, unyielding thing. He hoped to negotiate the charges down to a misdemeanor, but David would still have to face the public humiliation of a courtroom. While we were navigating the labyrinth of the County Justice Center, Julian Thorne showed up at our front door, looking completely destroyed. Julian, usually a vibrant and soulful musician, was now a shell of a man, his eyes bloodshot and vacant. He kept pacing our hallway, asking how long Elena had been weaving this tapestry of lies. Only last month, he had painted a nursery at the Legacy Lofts, a soft, sunny yellow that now felt like a mockery. He had announced the pregnancy to his entire family and spent $2,000 on a designer crib that was now just a hollow monument to a ghost. I couldn't sugarcoat the truth anymore. I showed him the laptop we'd seized, revealing a search history that stretched back over a year, a calculated curriculum on how to fake every stage of gestation. Julian had to run to our bathroom to retch when he saw the bookmarks regarding the hormonal supplements Elena had been taking to induce lactation. It was a level of commitment that bordered on the ghoulish. The fallout hit the media like a tidal wave. My mother, Margaret Vance, called me in a hysterical weeping. Channel 7 had broken the story of the attempted kidnapping, and our name was being dragged through the mud on the evening news. She couldn't even step out to her Cape Cod house's porch without a camera lens being shoved in her face. At the grocery store, a clerk had the audacity to ask if she was the mother of that woman who tried to steal a child. My father, Robert, had to take an indefinite leave from the Vance Real Estate Group because his colleagues wouldn't stop the pointed, venomous whispers in the break room. The detective eventually requested my presence to search Elena's unit at the Legacy Lofts. What we found inside that graphic designer's apartment was chilling. There were 3 notebooks, handwritten and meticulously organized, documenting every facet of Maya Sterling's life. Elena had recorded what the girl ate for lunch at the high school cafeteria and which bathroom stall at the mall she preferred. There were long-distance photos of Maya walking to her car, captured from across parking lots with predatory precision. It looked less like the ramblings of a sister and more like a tactical military operation. We found the receipts for the nurse scrubs and a counterfeit hospital ID badge Elena had commissioned online through an encrypted site. The betrayal ran deeper than just the stalking. While sorting through the clutter, I discovered credit card statements in my name that I never opened. Elena had used my social security number to open 3 separate accounts, maxing them out to fund her elaborate charade. She had done the same to Margaret, racking up $20,000 in fraudulent charges for designer maternity wear and private medical consultations. The detective sighed, noting that identity theft and felony fraud would be added to her burgeoning list of charges. We were forced to file police reports against our own flesh and blood, freezing our credit while the foundations of our lives crumbled around us. 3 days later, the tension broke in a different way. Maya Sterling gave labor and delivered a healthy baby girl at Mercy General. Security remained tight, a physical barrier against the madness Elena had unleashed. Sarah Jenkins, a seasoned case manager from the Child Welfare Department, was there to navigate the aftermath. Elena had been right about one thing. Maya lacked a traditional family support system, but now, with Sarah's guidance, the girl was applying for housing assistance and learning the ropes of motherhood away from the shadow of a kidnapper. There was something fundamentally haunting about Elena's notebooks, the way she tracked Maya's bathroom schedule with the coldness of a lab technician. It made me wonder what other horrors remained hidden in the dark corners of her mind. The baby was safe, and my sister was rotting in a jail cell, yet the peace felt fragile. We hoped for an end, but Elena's lawyer announced she wanted a full trial. She intended to argue that she was performing a public service by rescuing a child from an unfit mother, a delusion that turned my stomach. 2 days later, Diane Foster, the district attorney, arrived at our house with a stack of documents as thick as a metropolitan phone book. She laid them out across our kitchen table with clinical efficiency. The charges were a mountain: attempted kidnapping of a minor's child, stalking, identity theft, and multiple counts of fraud. David sat opposite her, holding his own much smaller stack of paperwork for his assault charge. Marcus Reed managed a deal. The prosecutor would reduce it to a misdemeanor assault if David pleaded guilty and accepted the judge's sentencing. It was the best outcome we could hope for, though it left a bitter taste of injustice. That night, the stress finally broke my father. I received a frantic call from the emergency room at Mercy General. Robert had suffered a minor heart episode, his chest tightening under the weight of the family's public execution. I found him hooked up to machines that hummed and beeped, a rhythmic reminder of how thin the line was between life and death. He kept asking the nurses how he could have been so blind to his own daughter's depravity. Margaret sat by his side, her eyes red and swollen, clutching his hand as if he were the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. The next morning, Julian Thorne called me back to the lofts. He had been packing up Elena's belongings and made another discovery in the bedroom closet. Tucked away in the back were 3 more foam prosthetic bellies, each labeled in Elena's precise handwriting, 6 months, 7 months, and 8 months. The receipts proved she had been practicing this role for over a year. Julian showed me videos on her phone, eerie footage of Elena standing before a mirror, trying on different gaits and poses to make the weight look natural. She had even written notes on which fabrics best concealed the straps and the seam where the foam met her skin. Even my grandmother, Dorothy Vance, wasn't spared. She hadn't left her room in 3 days, the door locked to the world. When Margaret finally used a spare key, she found Dorothy sitting in the pitch black, paralyzed by the realization that she had given Elena $5,000 for prenatal vitamins and medical bills. The shame of being a victim of her own granddaughter's con was consuming her. Finally, Marcus Reed called with one last revelation. He had dug into Elena's digital footprint and found she had joined a dozen pregnancy forums under various aliases. She had stolen ultrasound photos from real women and edited them with her own information. She had plagiarized entire threads of pregnancy stories, posting them as her own lived experiences to garner sympathy and advice. The lawyer printed hundreds of pages of these transcripts, showing how she had studied real pregnancies to make her lie perfect. 2 weeks after the initial chaos of the arrest, David and I stood within the sterile, wood-paneled confines of the County Justice Center. My husband, usually the pillar of our lives, looked smaller in his charcoal suit as he stood before the bench and pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault. The Honorable Evelyn Thorne, a Superior Court judge with a daze like cold flint, reviewed the evidence detailing why he had struck my sister. While she acknowledged the extreme provocation of Elena's deception, she reminded the court that violence remained an unacceptable solution to even the most heinous betrayals. She sentenced David to mandatory weekly anger management classes for 6 months and 100 hours of community service. David didn't flinch. He simply nodded and signed the paperwork with a steady hand. He knew, as I did, that he was incredibly lucky to avoid the interior of a jail cell. I returned to that same courthouse 3 weeks later for a hearing regarding Elena's criminal case. It was there I saw Maya Sterling. She was sitting on a hard wooden bench, looking incredibly fragile. At only 17, a high school senior from the foster care system, she seemed far too young for the weight of the world she carried. Her newborn daughter was a tiny, warm weight sleeping in a carrier against her chest. When Maya saw me, she adjusted her oversized cardigan and walked over, her dark circled eyes searching mine. She whispered thank you, her voice trembling as she credited me for stopping my sister from stealing her child. The baby made a soft, mewling noise, and Maya's hands were remarkably gentle as she adjusted the pastel blanket around the infant's face. Watching her, I understood with a stabbing pang why Elena had targeted her. Maya was alone, with no family to protect her in that intimidating courtroom. However, she wasn't entirely unsupported. Sarah Jenkins, a dedicated case manager from the Child Welfare Department, stood close by, acting as both a shield and a guide for the young mother. The psychiatrist's evaluation arrived in my mailbox 2 days before Elena's next hearing. The report was a chilling 20-page descent into a fractured mind. The clinical diagnosis was a combination of pseudopsych delusion disorder and antisocial behavior patterns. The doctor noted that Elena genuinely believed she was entitled to a child, convinced that she was a more worthy candidate for motherhood than those she deemed unfit. In her twisted logic, teenage mothers or women struggling with hardship were merely obstacles to her own happiness. Reading how her mind had systematically justified the plan to kidnap Maya's baby made my skin crawl with a deep, oily revulsion. Back at our parents' Cape Cod house, the atmosphere was one of mourning. Margaret and Robert had hired a financial advisor to untangle the web of Elena's thievery. The total was staggering, nearly $50,000 stolen through credit card fraud and direct manipulation of our grandmother, Dorothy. Vance to repay the family and the victims, my parents began the grueling process of liquidating assets, pulling from retirement savings they had spent decades building. My father, once proud of his work with the Vance Real Estate Group, could no longer look anyone in the eye on Sunday dinners. He lived in a state of perpetual apology, his shame more debilitating than his chronic heart problems. He felt he had personally failed by not seeing the monster growing in his own home. 3 weeks into her incarceration, I received a letter from Elena. It was written on yellow legal paper, the ink jagged and hurried. There was no apology. Instead, she claimed I had betrayed our bond and that she would never forgive me for ruining her life. She blamed everyone, David, our parents, and even Maya Sterling. She wrote that teenagers who get pregnant are fundamentally selfish and that she could have provided a perfect life in a nice house with 2 parents. The final line chilled me. I was doing the right thing, and you were all just too stupid to see the grace in it. I threw the letter into the kitchen trash, but its venomous entitlement lingered in the air for days. 2 days later, David began his court-mandated community service at a downtown youth center. It was a surreal assignment. The judge had ordered him to teach middle schoolers about conflict resolution and anger management. He walked into that first session with 12 skeptical 12-year-olds staring him down. Instead of following a curriculum, David was honest. He told them the whole story, from the baby shower to the moment he followed Elena and discovered the kidnapping plot. He explained that while anger can sometimes be a protective instinct, acting on it through violence always carries consequences, even when your cause feels righteous. When a boy asked if he regretted hitting her, David was candid. He didn't regret stopping the crime, but he regretted the use of his fists. The program coordinator watched from the back, nodding as David helped the kids navigate their own volatile emotions. While David found a rhythm in his service, I heard from Maya Sterling again. She called me in tears because a man claiming to be her estranged brother Cade had surfaced after the news of the attempted kidnapping broke. He had been gone for 4 years due to a drug addiction, but was now 2 years clean and working at a warehouse. He had arrived at her door with flowers and diapers, desperate to make amends. Sarah Jenkins performed a thorough background check to ensure Maya's safety. Eventually, Cade was allowed to meet her niece, providing Maya with a glimmer of the family support she had lacked for so long. Meanwhile, the rest of the Vance family sought refuge in group therapy. We sat in a circle with a specialist, grappling with the profound betrayal of someone we had loved and trusted for 31 years. Mom wept through every session, haunted by the signs she thought she should have seen, while Dad remained stuck in a loop of self-blame. The therapist repeatedly reminded us that we were victims of a sophisticated manipulator. She explained that people with Elena's specific pathology are experts at crafting a veneer of normalcy, making it impossible for those closest to them to see the rot beneath the veneer. The legal fallout expanded when Julian Thorne, Elena's ex-boyfriend, filed a lawsuit for emotional distress and fraud. A successful musician living at the Legacy Lofts, Julian had been entirely convinced he was becoming a father. His lawyer provided us with evidence that was almost too much to bear. Elena had been taking specific hormones to induce physical changes, including mimicking symptoms of pregnancy to maintain the facade. She had drained $8,000 of Julian's savings on high-end nursery equipment and forced him to announce the pregnancy to his entire social circle. He was seeking damages for the intense therapy he now required and the financial ruin she had caused. 2 months after the arrest, I was summoned to testify before a grand jury. The County Justice Center felt colder than ever as I stood before 23 strangers. Diane Foster, the district attorney, led the questioning with surgical precision. I had to recount the entire day of the baby shower, starting from the moment the first guest arrived. When I reached the part where I felt the foam belly dent and collapse under my touch, my hands began to shake so violently I had to pause for a drink of water. The prosecutor displayed photos of the evidence, multiple foam bellies of varying sizes that Elena had purchased online, along with the receipts. I spent 3 hours on the stand, detailing the shift in Elena's eyes when her secret was finally bared. The grand jury took less than an hour to indict her on all counts, including attempted kidnapping and multiple counts of felony fraud. As I left the building, I saw Sarah Jenkins across the hall, still working tirelessly with Maya Sterling to secure housing assistance. Life was moving forward for the victims, even as the shadow of my sister's malice loomed over everything we once thought was true. Sarah Jenkins, our local case manager, didn't just provide a roadmap for recovery, she walked the path alongside Maya Sterling. She signed the girl up for vocational training at the community college, navigating the labyrinth of brick hallways to find the registrar's office. Maya had her heart set on becoming a dental assistant, a practical, grounded dream that would allow her to support her infant daughter without the crushing weight of dependency. Sarah navigated the WIC office to secure formula vouchers and wrestled with the bureaucracy of childcare assistance. Julian Thorne, Maya's brother, became the anchor they didn't know they needed. A musician who had been sober for 2 years, Julian took the overnight shifts at a local security company, a job Sarah helped him land, so he could watch the baby during the day while Maya attended classes. Between the construction sites and the nursery rhymes, they were slowly rebuilding a family from the ruins of their past. Back at our suburban estate, the silence between David and me felt heavy, like the static air before a summer storm. I couldn't purge the image of his fist from my mind. Every time we sat down to a meal, the rhythmic clink of forks against stoneware seemed to transform into the sound of his knuckles hitting that foam belly. I looked at his hands, the same hands that held me at our wedding, now stained by the violence of that afternoon. I wondered if the man I married was still there, or if the darkness of Elena's games had permanently altered the chemistry of our home. Every shadow in the hallway felt like a reminder of her ghost, a lingering scent of the lavender perfume she used to mask her rot. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, mourning a sibling now. Even knowing he had saved a life didn't lessen the visceral shock of seeing my husband strike my sister. The memory of the foam denting and collapsing under his touch made my stomach twist with a physical nausea. I spent hours obsessing over the architecture of Elena's deception. She hadn't just lied, she'd manipulated her own biology, taking hormones to induce lactation. It was a terrifying synthesis of clinical precision and total psychotic delusion. David noticed me flinching when he reached for a napkin, and we eventually sought a trauma counselor. The therapist explained my mind was trapped in a collision of gratitude and horror. The news coverage acted like a flare in the night, drawing out other women who had been haunted by my sister. 3 separate victims contacted the district attorney, Diane Foster. One woman described Elena appearing at her prenatal checkups wearing a costume of concern while asking predatory questions about the baby's due date. Another recounted being followed through a dimly lit parking garage after a birthing class, where Elena had pressured her for a phone number with an intensity that felt like a physical threat. The third woman provided screenshots from a private pregnancy group where Elena, using a fake profile, had spent weeks trying to extract her home address. The depth of her predatory behavior was a bottomless well that seemed to have no end. My father, Robert Vance, couldn't sit still while the family name was dragged through the mud. He hired Marcus Reed to file a civil lawsuit aiming to claw back the $30,000 Elena had swindled from him. Reed warned us that while criminal restitution was a distant hope, civil court moved with more agility. Dad spent his nights in the study, surrounded by mountains of bank statements and forged invoices for medical procedures that never happened. The total amount grew as more relatives called, including my grandmother, Dorothy Vance. She remembered mailing cash for emergency prescriptions Elena claimed insurance wouldn't cover. The paper trail was a testament to how long she'd been grooming us all for her final performance. In a move that shocked even the bailiffs, Elena fired her public defender. She stood in the county justice center, looking fragile but defiant, and told Judge Evelyn Thorne that she would represent herself. She claimed the entire legal system was a conspiracy designed to pathologize her noble attempt to save a child. Judge Thorne, her expression a mask of judicial patience, ordered another psychiatric evaluation. The psychiatrist spent 4 hours over 2 days with Elena, even reviewing the jailhouse surveillance footage. The results were damning. Narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. The report stated she knew the difference between right and wrong, but simply believed her own desires were a higher law. The recommendation was 5 years of intensive therapy, regardless of whether she ended up in a cell. My mother, Margaret, was the one who broke first. 3 weeks after the indictment, she had a massive panic attack in the middle of a grocery store aisle. A stranger had recognized her from the nightly news and asked if she was the fake pregnancy mother. Mom dropped a jar of marinara sauce, the red glass shattering across the linoleum like a crime scene. She fled to her car and sat there for 20 minutes, gasping for air, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dad found her that evening sitting in a dark kitchen, her face streaked with tears, as she confessed she could no longer face the world. The doctor prescribed heavy anxiety medication, but the pills turned her into a ghost. She stopped going to her book club and yoga, retreating into a fog of pharmaceutical numbness. David reached the halfway mark of his community service at the youth center, but he wasn't just checking boxes. He found a strange kinship with a teenager named Isaac, who had the same simmering rage David had struggled with. David's instructor, an ex-Marine named Frank, began meeting with David one-on-one after the group sessions. Frank forced David to deconstruct the moment of the punch, the heat in his blood, the narrowing of his vision. They worked through scenarios of de-escalation, practicing how to hold back even when the world felt like it was inviting a strike. David came home different, quieter, his anger replaced by a weary sort of vigilance that felt like progress. That Saturday, while cleaning the garage of our suburban estate, I discovered a box of Elena's belongings from her last visit. Tucked beneath some old college textbooks were printed articles about the lucrative nature of international adoption, with prices for infants listed as high as $50,000. There were handwritten notes on how to forge birth certificates and which countries had the least government oversight. She'd bookmarked stories of people who had been caught, highlighting their mistakes in neon yellow ink. I immediately called Diane Foster. The prosecutor said this changed everything. It proved the kidnapping wasn't just an emotional breakdown, it was the start of a trafficking scheme. 2 months after the arrest, the plea deal arrived. 15 years, with parole eligibility after 7 if she showed remorse. The alternative was a trial with a 25-year to life sentence. As the lawyers argued over Elena's fate, life for the rest of us began to find a new, fragile rhythm. Maya Sterling got accepted into a GED program for young mothers at the community college. The program offered free childcare 3 nights a week and on Saturday mornings, providing her the first real chance at a life of her own. As I watched Maya walk into her first class, I realized that while Elena was trapped in her own delusions, the rest of us were finally learning to breathe again. Julian Thorne adjusted his demanding rehearsal schedule as a musician so he could watch the baby while Maya Sterling was in class. My husband, David, helped him navigate the transition, setting up a rigid but necessary routine of feedings and naps. Maya was fiercely determined to finish her GED and start the dental assistant program the following year, driven by a future she finally believed she deserved. The baby was thriving, hitting every milestone with a vigor that made our hearts ache, and Maya eventually sent us a digital photo of her smiling for the first time, a toothless, joyful expression that seemed to defy the darkness of her origins. Elena's lawyer presented the plea deal during a grainy video call from the precinct detention area. Before he could even finish articulating the terms, Elena's face contorted and she began screaming at the monitor. She shrieked that she wouldn't accept any deal because she had done nothing wrong. She remained convinced a jury would see her as a savior, a woman merely trying to rescue an innocent infant from the clutches of an unfit mother. Her lawyer, a man whose patience was clearly fraying, tried to explain that the evidence against her was insurmountable, but Elena fired him on the spot. She declared she would find counsel who actually believed in her mission. The judge eventually appointed another public defender, but Elena refused to acknowledge their presence, filing the complex paperwork to represent herself once again. The guards reported she was refusing the medication prescribed for her spiraling anxiety, instead spending every waking hour in the law library. She was a ghost in the stacks, researching obscure cases where defendants had beaten kidnapping charges through technicalities. She wrote frantic, sprawling letters to anyone who might listen, claiming she was a martyr being persecuted for the crime of wanting a child to have a better life. Our family therapist made us sit in a tight circle every Tuesday afternoon. Her office always smelled like cloying vanilla candles and old books, a sensory backdrop to our collective unraveling. She used a squeaky marker to draw a timeline on a large whiteboard, marking dates of Elena's past deceptions that we had conveniently buried in our subconscious. There was the incident 5 years ago when Elena claimed she had stage 3 cancer. David and I, along with Margaret and Robert, had all shaved our heads in a solemn show of solidarity, only to have the world shatter when Robert discovered she had never even stepped foot in the oncologist's office she had named. The therapist kept adding more jagged lies to the board. She noted the time Elena claimed she had been accepted into a prestigious nursing school when she was actually spending her days working at a remote gas station to avoid our questions. Margaret cried through most of these sessions, the sound low, rhythmic mourning. She remembered with newfound clarity how Elena would fixate on pregnant women in grocery stores, her gaze predatory as she asked to touch their bellies. The therapist's voice was soft but firm when she said, "We've all been in a state of deep denial because facing the truth meant admitting that someone we loved was capable of truly terrible things." David finished his final day of community service at the local youth center on a brisk Thursday. The kids, who had grown surprisingly fond of his quiet presence, threw him a small party with lopsided cupcakes they'd decorated themselves. A boy named Isaac, who usually kept his distance, handed David a letter. It was written on lined notebook paper explaining how David's own story of making a devastating mistake had helped Isaac understand his own volatile anger. Isaac wrote that he was learning to count to 10 and walk away rather than hitting when things got heated with his stepdad. 3 other children wrote notes as well, and David folded them carefully, tucking them into his wallet like precious relics. The youth center director even asked if David would return as a volunteer basketball coach, a request that brought a rare, genuine smile to my husband's face. Later, the district attorney, Diane Foster, called us into her office at the County Justice Center. The walls were a gallery of law degrees and framed photos of her own children, a stark contrast to the grim files spread across the mahogany conference table. She explained the trial would begin in 3 months. Elena was planning to argue she was performing a public service by targeting Maya, whom she continued to label as unfit. Diane showed us the motions Elena had filed, delusional documents claiming Maya was a heavy drug user, even though every court-ordered drug test had come back pristine. Diane warned us that Elena would attempt to paint herself as a heroic figure saving a child from neglect. Margaret and Robert eventually met with a real estate agent about their beloved vacation home in the mountains. They had bought the Cape Cod-style retreat 20 years ago and painstakingly renovated it with their own hands, but the financial toll of Elena's life was too high. They needed the equity to pay back the people Elena had scammed over the years. Our uncle received $1,500 back, and our aunts were reimbursed for the investments Elena had solicited. My grandmother, Dorothy Vance, refused to take a single cent from the sale, insisting she only wanted our family to finally find a path towards healing. The house sold in just 2 weeks to a young family with 3 small children. I was picking out gala apples in the grocery store when the sound of a baby cry cut through the hum of the refrigerators. I turned to see Maya pushing a cart, her daughter nestled in a carrier. Julian Thorne was beside her, his head down as he compared formula prices on his phone. The baby had the most beautiful, chubby cheeks and was wearing a soft pink onesie that read, "Mommy's Girl," in delicate embroidery. As I watched them, the weight of Elena's lies from 5 years ago felt heavier than ever. I wondered how we all had looked the other way back then. How did we not question the cancer story until Robert finally checked the records? Maya looked exhausted, the dark circles under her eyes a testament to the reality of motherhood, but she was smiling at her daughter, making ridiculous faces to soothe the crying. When I reached out, the baby grabbed my finger with a grip that was shockingly strong for someone so small. Soon, letters began arriving at our homes with Elena's inmate number as the return address. She wrote to our aunt claiming I was consumed by jealousy and had poisoned David's mind. She told our cousins that David was a violent, dangerous man and warned them to keep their children away from our house. Most of our relatives threw the letters away, but Robert's brother called us, his voice wavering, asking if perhaps we had all overreacted. Margaret had to sit with him and present the evidence again, the receipts for the various fake pregnancy bellies Elena had purchased online, and the disturbing stalking videos she had taken of Maya's apartment. Elena even wrote to our former neighbors, portraying herself as a political prisoner who was being persecuted for the crime of wanting a child to have a better life. Diane eventually obtained court-ordered recordings of Elena's phone calls from the precinct detention area. We sat in her office as we listened to Elena tell another inmate her plan to reclaim her baby the moment she was released. She described Maya as a worthless addict who didn't deserve motherhood despite the absolute lack of evidence. In one chilling call, Elena admitted she knew exactly where Maya lived and said she would wait as long as it took. Diane looked at us grimly, noting that these recordings proved Elena remained a significant danger. During a cell search, the guards even found detailed drawings Elena had made of infants. David and I spent every weekend for a month driving through different neighborhoods looking for a new home. Our current house had become a landmark for reporters, and we couldn't stand the sight of people slowing their cars to take pictures of the porch where the baby shower had once been. We needed a place where the air didn't feel heavy with the memory of Elena's shadow.
The neighbors in our old neighborhood were polite, though their profound discomfort was palpable. It was as if our tragedy were a contagion they feared catching by lingering too long in our driveway. Eventually, we found a place 40 minutes away in a quiet suburb where the air felt lighter and we were anonymous. The moving truck arrived on a crisp Saturday, and David and I packed our lives into cardboard boxes while trying not to look at the backyard where the baby shower gift table had once stood, a monument to a lie. Dorothy Vance, my 84-year-old grandmother, finally agreed to give a statement after staying silent for months, torn between family loyalty and the truth. She was too frail for the journey to court, so the legal team set up a video call from her sun-drenched living room. She sat in her favorite wingback chair wearing her best Sunday dress, her Catholic icons watching from the mantel, as she told the prosecutor about giving Elena $5,000 intended for prenatal vitamins and maternity clothes. Her hands shook visibly as she held up canceled checks. She explained that Elena had come to her house weeping about mounting medical bills, claiming she needed help to give her baby the best possible start. When asked if she wanted the money back, Dorothy's voice cracked. She said she just wanted Elena to get help and never hurt another family again. Shortly after, Maya Sterling brought her baby to Diane Foster's office for a meeting, and I was there to provide support. The baby was 6 months old now, a bright-eyed little girl who was enthusiastically starting to eat mashed bananas and sweet potatoes. Sarah Jenkins, the case manager from the Child Welfare Department, joined us and reported that Maya hadn't missed a single parenting class or pediatrician appointment. The baby was in the perfect weight range, having rolled over early and already showing a determined desire to crawl. Sarah noted that in her 20 years as a social worker, she'd rarely seen such a devoted young mother. Maya was studying for her GED every night after the baby went to sleep, while her boyfriend worked grueling overtime to cover daycare. Diane Foster took pictures of the healthy, happy infant to show the jury exactly what Elena had tried to steal. 90 days later, I walked into the County Justice Center for jury selection and saw Elena for the first time since her arrest. She'd lost at least 30 pounds, and her cheekbones stuck out like sharp razors under skin that looked as thin as parchment. The orange detention jumpsuit hung loose on her skeletal frame, and her hair was matted and flat. She kept hissing at her lawyer, Marcus Reed, saying she didn't need to be there. Judge Evelyn Thorne had to order her to sit down 4 times before finally threatening to have her gagged for the duration of the proceedings. The prosecutor asked potential jurors if they could remain impartial towards someone accused of planning to kidnap a newborn. Elena kept shaking her head and mouthing the word no every time a juror claimed they could be fair. We managed to pick 12 jurors and 2 alternates by lunch, though Elena loudly informed the judge that they were all idiots. The next morning, opening statements began, and Elena interrupted the prosecutor 6 times in the first 10 minutes. She stood up, her voice shrill, claiming she was helping society by taking a baby from an unfit mother. Judge Thorne warned her twice, stating that one more outburst would result in immediate contempt charges and removal. Elena sat back down, but continued making exaggerated faces and shaking her head, while the prosecution showed photos of the fake foam bellies and the chilling screenshots of Elena following Maya through the halls of the hospital. Marcus Reed gave his opening statement, and Elena kept trying to snatch the microphone from his hand. 2 days later, I took the witness stand at 8 in the morning and didn't leave until well after 2. The prosecutor walked me through the harrowing afternoon of finding the foam belly and discovering the digital trail of evidence David had collected. I described the sickening sensation of pressing my hands into the dented foam where my nephew should have been, and the horror of hearing Elena admit she thought a teenager didn't deserve her own child. Elena stared at me for the entire 6 hours without blinking or looking away once, her eyes dark and hollow. During cross-examination, Marcus Reed asked if I had ever seen signs of mental illness before the incident. I had to say no, even though looking back, there were 1,000 subtle red flags we had missed. The prosecutor then showed the jury the physical receipts for the fake bellies and the chilling screenshots of Elena following Maya through the halls of the hospital. I identified Elena's precise graphic designer's handwriting on the notes regarding Maya's induction schedule and confirmed the credit card she had fraudulently opened in my name. When I finally stepped down, my legs were shaking so violently I almost collapsed. The next morning, Maya Sterling took the stand holding her baby, who was now 9 months old. She described meeting Elena at the teen pregnancy support group and how she always sat uncomfortably close, asking deeply personal questions. Maya's voice broke when she spoke about the terror of finding out someone had been planning to steal her child the very day she gave birth. She admitted she hadn't slept soundly for months and still checked the deadbolts obsessively every night. 3 jurors were visibly wiping their eyes when Maya described being 17 and alone, thinking Elena was a mentor when she was actually a predator. The baby started crying during the testimony, and Maya bounced her gently while explaining how Elena had discovered her induction date and work schedule. Elena's lawyer didn't cross-examine Maya at all, a move that caused Elena to slam her hands against the defense table in a fit of rage. David testified the following afternoon about following Elena to a bar on a day she was supposed to be at a high-risk medical appointment. He admitted that punching her was a mistake and noted he'd already completed his court-ordered community service and anger management. However, he looked the jury in the eye and explained he couldn't let an innocent child be stolen, and he knew the police wouldn't believe a husband's suspicions without cold, hard proof. He showed the security footage he'd saved of Elena stalking Maya for months. When Marcus Reed asked David if he enjoyed hitting a woman, David replied firmly, "No, but I'd do it again to save a baby." The jury deliberated for only 3 hours, a window of time our lawyers said was remarkably fast for a case of this magnitude. They returned with guilty verdicts on all 7 counts, including conspiracy to commit kidnapping and fraud. Elena jumped up, screaming that they were all morons who didn't understand she was trying to give that baby a real life. The bailiffs were forced to drag her out of the courtroom while she continued to shriek that Maya was trash, who would ruin her child. 2 weeks later at sentencing, Judge Thorne gave Elena 18 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole in 10 if she successfully completed intensive psychiatric treatment. Elena merely laughed, shouting that she'd rather do the full 18 than pretend she was wrong. The judge noted that the choice was hers, but she would be transferred to a psychiatric correctional facility regardless of her attitude. Within a month, Elena was moved to a high-security facility 3 hours away, where she was required to attend daily therapy behind reinforced glass.
The doctors at the psychiatric correctional facility called us after Elena Vance's final evaluation. Their clinical voices offered no comfort as they explained that her personality disorder was severe and deeply rooted, a labyrinth of narcissistic traits that would take years of intensive treatment to even begin addressing. She still believed, with chilling conviction, that she had done nothing wrong. To Elena, Maya Sterling's baby was a prize she had been unfairly denied, a piece of property she talked about as if she were the rightful owner reclaiming a stolen heirloom. Robert and Margaret, my parents, sought refuge in a grandparent support group at the local community center. It was a gathering for families whose lives had been upended by the criminal actions of their own children. Dad said it helped to hear other people's stories, to listen to voices that trembled with the same heavy shame that kept him awake at night. After 6 months, Mom became a regular speaker, reminding new members that loving your child does not necessitate excusing their crimes. They even established a fund through the Vance Real Estate Group to help young mothers like Maya afford basic childcare supplies, turning their wealth into a protective shield. David, my husband and a software engineer, found a new sense of purpose on the field. He started spending his evenings coaching youth baseball and soccer at the recreation center. He used the lessons he'd learned from his own anger management sessions to teach the kids about emotional regulation. He'd talk to them about the weight of consequences and the power of making better choices, his voice calm and firm. He never gave specifics about Alina, but the kids respected him because they could tell he truly understood the red fog of anger. He taught them how to handle it safely without hurting anyone around them. A year passed, marked by small victories. We all drove to the community college for Maya's graduation ceremony. The sun was hot and the air smelled of freshly cut grass. Maya walked across the stage in her cap and gown, her head held high. When the dean announced that Maya had been accepted into the social work program for the fall semester, she pumped her fist in the air, a gesture of pure triumph. I looked at her and wondered how she had managed to study for her GED while nursing a baby through the night. The way she balanced her education with motherhood while carrying the trauma of Elena's obsession made me realize she was the strongest person I knew. After the ceremony, Maya showed us her acceptance letter while her daughter reached out to grab the tassel on her cap. David and I looked at each other amidst the cheering crowd and knew we were finally ready to try for a baby of our own. We had spent months in therapy, deconstructing the events that had nearly destroyed us and learning how to rebuild trust. We were finally ready to look forward instead of over our shoulders at the ghosts of our past. The heavy weight of dread that had lived in my chest for years suddenly dissolved into a quiet, tentative new sense of peace. The future finally felt like a promise instead of a threat to our sanity. That weekend, Dad sat at his mahogany desk for 6 hours writing and rewriting a letter to Elena. He eventually showed Mom the final version. In it, he wrote that he loved her, but he could not have any contact with her until she took full responsibility for the kidnapping and the fraud she had orchestrated. His hands were shaking as he pressed the seal on the envelope. Mom had to drive him to the post office because his eyes were so clouded with tears that he couldn't see the road through the grief. The extended Vance family began hosting small dinners again at the Fireside Lounge, though the guest list was permanently altered. Half the relatives still refused to attend, the stain of the scandal too much for them. My uncle hosted Thanksgiving with just 12 people instead of 40, but the atmosphere was lighter. Everyone actually talked instead of performing the usual dance of polite pretense. My cousin brought her new boyfriend, and for the first time, the shadow of my sister didn't dominate the holiday. We found a fragile, honest peace in that smaller, tighter circle. 3 years into her 18-year sentence, the facility called to say Elena had finally started participating in group therapy. She had admitted, for the first time, that she needed help. It wasn't an apology, and she still wouldn't admit she was wrong, but the doctor called it real progress. She had at least stopped insisting that Maya didn't deserve her baby. Meanwhile, Maya finished her first year of social work classes while working part-time at the downtown women's shelter. She began leading support groups for other teen moms, using her own story to help them see a path forward. Sarah Jenkins, her former case manager, wrote a letter stating that Maya was the best peer counselor they had ever employed. David and I were overjoyed to find out I was pregnant shortly after Maya started her second year of college. We chose the name Hope, needing a beacon of light after so much darkness. When she was born at Oakwood Birthing Center, we declined the nurse's offer to put her birth announcement in the paper. We preferred our joy to remain private. When acquaintances at the grocery store would occasionally ask about Hope's aunt, we simply told them she was getting the help she needed. We no longer felt the need to explain or recount the tragedy to satisfy someone else's curiosity. It wasn't their business anymore. 5 years after that horrific afternoon, our family has settled into a new normal. We have weekly dinners and monthly game nights, though our lives are now guarded by security cameras. Mom keeps the doors locked even during the day, a habit she can't break. Dad found peace through the church, volunteering at the food bank every Saturday morning. David continues coaching, teaching kids how to navigate their emotions. I watch Hope playing at the park and ensure she understands the importance of boundaries. We're teaching her that while family means love, it also means holding people accountable. The psychiatrist called again last month to report that Elena is making slow progress, but she will likely need many more years of treatment before release. We listened to the update and thanked them, but we don't visit or write back anymore. We've learned to recognize the red flags, the subtle manipulations, and the victim playing. We've stopped making excuses for toxic behavior and started calling out things that don't feel right. Mom is now the secretary for her support group, helping others understand that mental illness is not a justification for harming others. Dad still writes in his journal every night, exploring the terrain of forgiveness and distance. My brothers and I check in weekly, continuing our own therapy. The extended family is slowly merging back together, but with new rules regarding trust. No one gives cash gifts anymore. If someone needs help, receipts are required. It's a pragmatic approach to love. Hope turned 3 last month and asked why she only has one aunt. We told her Aunt Alina was sick and needed special doctors. She accepted the answer and went back to her toys. Maya has graduated and working full-time at the shelter, while she and her daughter have moved into a larger apartment near the legacy lofts. Our lives aren't perfect, but they are honest and free from the manipulation that once defined us. Thank you for walking this road with me. Until we meet again, take care. If you followed our story, please leave a comment.